Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Funny story, when I recorded with Sam, he was my first guest, and I had just uploaded the first episode, which was just me, and I marked the podcast as clean for Apple. And then Sam comes on. Within the first 30 seconds, he dropped 2 F-bombs. He's like, gotta change that.
Well, you know, it's funny, man. I, for no good reason at all, curse way too much, and I'm trying to reel it in. I'm doing it. It's on the list. We're getting better.
It's all good, man. The listeners have been exposed at this point. So with that being said, we might as well just kick this off. We are back with the Project Endure podcast, episode 20. We've got myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very special guest sitting currently in Westfield, New Jersey, Kieran Williams. Kieran, what is up, man?
Joe, nothing much, man. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again.
Of course. It's good to see you too. Yeah. So Kieran and I met a few weeks back, maybe a month at this point. I was up in Westfield. We got a workout in at the garage gym. Kieran, Sam, a few others. My buddy Steve was up from Oklahoma, and we had a brutal workout. That was a tough one. And then maybe a week later, we recorded the podcast for the Pursuit podcast. And that conversation really dipped into what I would consider Project Endure territory, where we talked quite a bit about hard things. And I just knew I had to get you on this one. And so I don't want to give too much away. Why don't you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Much appreciated, man. And listen, thanks for having me on. Now you're kind of stuck with me for better or for worse. Now that we're friends. But everyone, my name is Kieran Williams. I am 25. I live in New Jersey. When not training, racing, and competing for various athletic endeavors, I run a gym with my buddy Sam. That's where Joe and I first met. And a full-time software sales man, and spend as much time as I can with friends and family, just hanging out.
Software salesman. The way you said that made me think of, I think it's Kanye. He says, I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman.
Probably say software sales boy, but yeah.
You're a man. How old are you for reference, Kieran?
25.
Yeah. You made
I feel
the
like
cut.
I'm 12 most of the time though, so it's a very tricky balance.
You made the cut. Well, let's do this. Why don't we jump into something that we didn't talk a whole lot about the last time we spoke, which is your day job, selling stuff. How long have you been doing that for? What's that like?
Yeah, man, it's cool. I work at a small company called Global Data Consortium, and I'll keep this concise. Back in October of 2020, right? 2020. COVID is kind of a blur. I was hired completely remote for a company that sells and produces identity verification software. We won't go into the weeds there, but I work with a lot of really, really awesome folks who are much more intelligent than I am, and it's completely remote. So I work based in New Jersey. The company itself is based in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I spend quite a bit of time down there as well, which I love. And the company has more than anything, actually, global presence. So much of my day is speaking with folks outside of the U.S., which has been a really, really cool experience.
Yeah. Are you making sales calls? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. Making sales calls, doing a lot of pitching, we'll call it.
Yeah.
So roping people in on the phone to talk to me is an art that has become pretty fun. And then from there, who knows what?
Next time I get one of those calls, do you spend more than $100 on your electricity bill? Kieran? No, just kidding. But on a serious note, right? I would assume that you deal with rejection a little bit with what you do. Tell us a little bit about how that's been.
It's been a good learning experience. I will say, especially in the world of rejection, and I'll tie that pretty closely with public speaking too. Sure. So one of the coolest things about my role, and again, globally, folks who are not based in the US, has been roping them in to talk to me. They may know what I'm talking about. They may not know what I'm talking about, and basically looking to produce next steps. So next steps are great. And that comes from me doing repetitions of figuring out what the heck it is that we do, making sure I understand it, and then trying to convey that as properly as I can to you so that you understand it. Lots of no's too. But that's been an awesome learning experience because historically, no meant no, and you kind of just pat it on, or at least I did. But I've learned just through like, no may mean no at first in the sales world. But it could turn into a yes. It could then turn into a yes at a later date. It may still be a no. But it's been a fun little journey so far.
Yeah. I'm sure we could probably have a whole podcast just based on that. But for the sake of why I wanted you to come on here, right? You're in the world of ultra running, and I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. But I just want to lead off with the first question, and we'll see where you take it. And that question is, what is the hardest thing or circumstance that you've ever had to handle?
It's a good question, man. And I was thinking about it heading into today's call. So growing up, I played mostly soccer. I played soccer from 6 years old through college to 21 or 22, I think. Soccer was my pride and joy. I was the kid who wore soccer jerseys literally every single day of school. No joke, man. I remember one day when I was in elementary school, you know, you wear like shin guards in soccer to protect your shins so you get hit. It's not like broken. I had like the coolest shin guard sleeves ever, at least so I thought, right? And I wore them to school for whatever reason, and it was just not cool. But like that's just I'm trying to make an example of how much I loved soccer. Like wearing shin guards to school for no reason, wearing soccer jerseys all the time. It was my life. So with that, all I wanted to do was play college soccer. It was the dream, the end goal at that point in my life. So I was very fortunate that playing very competitive soccer, I committed to Rutgers University in Newark at the time, which was a Division III school. And it was college soccer, like check the box. Awesome. That's all I ever wanted. Trained, again, from 6 years old on, trained the whole summer. Where you get like a packet that is basically like a training plan leading into preseason. Everyone I talked to was like, dude, you don't have to do that. Like, we're just going to, like, that's what preseason is for. You just train. Why would you train before I was like, no, dude, I'm like, coach gave me this. I'm going to do all this to a T. And then I'm going to get the preseason. Go from there. Trained all summer long, showed up to preseason. Preseason, you move into campus early, and it's basically training 2 to 3 times a day, every day for like 2-3 weeks, something like that. Middle of summer, hot as anything, on the turf, miserable. I couldn't be more excited to be there. On the first day of here we go. On the first day of preseason, literally the first day, we had a triple. So we had a third session. And I'm literally running on the field, didn't even touch the ball. Ball wasn't by me. I went to change directions, and I planted and heard like and then just like fell. No pain. But I was like, oh, dude, what the? I knew it wasn't good.
Yeah.
So I was more pissed off than anything. I was like, crap, man. So I stood up. I walked off the field. I walked like the assistant trainer at the time. I was like, hey, this happened. I don't know. It's kind of weird. She like looked at it, and she's like, I think you're good to go. I was like, I don't know. But my knee has never made noises, let alone that noise. Is it cool if I just take the session off? I went to the head trainer, and he did a very simple, you're PT, right? Did a very simple test where basically if you pull on your knee and it moves a lot, your ACL was torn. And he's pulling, yanking on my knee. There's no ACL in there. And he looks at me and he goes, listen, man, I hate to be the very bad news right now, but there's like a 98% chance you tore your ACL. And I was like, what did you just say? And I was broke. I was like, that sucks. I remember like trying to hold it together.
Yeah.
And like they're still playing outside. The trainer's office was like the next block over. And like now I got to go back to practice and be like, hey, coach, I'm out for the season. That kind of stinks.
Yeah.
And like I remember sitting on the steps that you walk up to get on the field and losing it for like 5-10 minutes, just letting all this out, cleaning myself up, going to the coach, but hey man, tore my ACL, out for the season, like ended up getting MRIs. It was all jacked up, ACL, meniscus, you name it. And that stunk. So that was a good kickoff the freshman year. And it was a gut punch, man. We went on to basically just run through the works, 9 months of rehab, and ended up coming back from it. But freshman year, college Kieran was a much different Kieran now. And at the time, I was shook, man. Like, couldn't really rationalize. Like, you train your whole life, and then you tear your ACL, and then it's gone. And now you're just sitting on the bench, and you thought you were going to play soccer. It was tough, man. And if there's any humor in this story, it was the fact that my dad, who was way too nice to me, actually took off of work because it was, when you tear ACL, normally you're able to walk, but because I tore my meniscus, apparently I wasn't allowed to. No one wanted to trust me with crutches. They tossed me in a wheelchair, which was like gut punch after gut punch. It's like the first week of freshman year, and I'm in a wheelchair now getting pushed by my dad on campus. And I don't know if you've ever been to Newark, New Jersey, but they have the worst roads ever. So my poor dad is like doing his best to like push me around, and I'm just yelling at him for no good reason because I'm just in a we can laugh about it now. At the time, it wasn't too funny, but I'd have to put that, at least at present, probably top of the list. At that point in my life was the hardest thing that happened to me that I really had no control over.
Yeah, dude, that's rough. And as somebody who's treated plenty of patients who've gone through that same thing, right? It's not easy to handle, especially when at that point in your life, soccer is you, right? That's your identity. Now, when you were telling the story, you had a smile on your face the whole time. And it's interesting. I want to ask you why you're able to smile about it now, because you're just, right. It doesn't weigh on you right now the same way it did back then, obviously. So what's the difference for you?
I grew up and my mom was known for saying it is what it is. Like, yeah. I didn't do it on purpose. No one hurt me. It was a freaky thing. I had no control over it. It is what it is. Like, life goes on. Like, and listen, man, for me to sit here and say that the hardest thing in my life to date has been me tearing an ACL and then going through really systematic rehab that everyone knows works and then coming back from is a privilege, dude. Like, I had like, it was tough even to come up with it. Like, I think in the grand scheme of things, man, I'm privileged at large. So like, listen, was tearing my ACL ideal? No, by no means. Like, it sucked, but like, it is what it is. Like, you deal with it, you figure it out, and you move forward, and you look to be better off for it.
Yeah. Now, did you have that same attitude though at the time when
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, man. I was a miserable little boy by freshman year.
Now let's say the scenario is similar, right? You're in a rec soccer league, you sign up for one, come springtime, and you're really into it, tear your ACL again. Do you have a more composed reaction and calculated perspective on it this time around? Should an equivalent happen again at this point in your life?
100%. And I've thought about that, funny enough. Like, I love running. I love training. I love pushing my body. But in the event, like, I broke my leg, I would find a pool to swim in. I would do more pull-ups. I would, like, you can still, soccer is hyper-specific, right? So, like, me not playing soccer, that was pretty binary. You're not playing soccer. At this point in my life, there's so much for me to do. There's so much for me to learn. I think one of the best books I've read was Josh Waitzkin. What's the name of that one again?
I don't know if I've read that one. Let's see.
I'm drawing a blank, but he basically details how every opportunity, for better or for worse, is an opportunity to get better, right? So
the art of learning?
Yep, the art of learning, exactly.
Yeah.
Really, really good reading. If they're, like, knock on wood, I don't want to tear my ACL by any means, but if I were to tear my ACL tomorrow, I would be bummed for a little bit. And I say, okay, man, like what way can I push myself next? Right? Like there's ultra endurance swimming races that at present I would stink at. But if I tore my ACL and couldn't run for 9 months, I would just do that. Maybe I'll hop on the bike if I can. Maybe I do pull-ups. Maybe I do, you name it. Like for me, it is what it is. Figure it out. You can either sit and whine about it for 9 months, or life goes on, realize that not everything's about Kieran Williams, and look to be better off for it.
I agree, man. And I like the phrase disappointed but not discouraged. And I think it's very easy to blur the lines between those two and go from feeling disappointed to discouraged and to stay there. But to me, disappointed is a short-term, transient, surface level thing. It is what it is. Now we move on. And I also think this is, again, skipping ahead to the conversation on endurance, but endurance is a mindset, right? And just because physically your body gets held back in one specific area, you can continue to move forward physically, but more importantly, mentally, despite that. But I'm going to hold you off on that because I want to hear about that later. I'm going to transition now into the different second question, which is, what is the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose and why? And I really want to emphasize the why here. And you could tell the whole story, but here's why. You just described how fortunate you've been not to endure a ton of hardship at this point in your life. And so my take is that if somebody hasn't experienced a lot of hardship, why would you seek that out? And that goes for anybody listening to ask that question to themselves as Kieran responds here. So Kieran, what's the hardest thing you've done on purpose and why?
Absolutely, man. I will have to point to my first 100-mile. I don't even want to call it a run because there was not much running going on. It was like first 100-mile, like crawl, limp, cry, maybe is a better way to put it. But long story short, when I was a senior in college, this was 2019, I had read a book about this dude who ran 100 miles. Book was Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I came across it from reading one of Jesse Itzler's book. Awesome read as well. But ended up reading David Goggins' book. He was talking about how, like, basically on a whim, he jumped into this race called the San Diego One Day. And it's a 24-hour run that you try to run 100 miles in. And I was like, what? Like at that point in my time, for good reason, marathon is incredibly difficult. No slight to it, but I just thought a marathon was it. Like, why would you ever run over a marathon? And I read about this guy running 100 miles. I think he did it in like 18 or 19 hours. And I was like, whoa. And it just hooked me, like for no really rhyme or reason. At that point, I wasn't even really running. At this point, I had transferred from Rutgers Newark to Rutgers New Brunswick. So I was playing club soccer, which you don't have to be that fit for, and was kind of just hanging out, doing the senior college thing. I read this book and I dove into ultra. What is it? It's anything over the marathon distance, which is 26.2 miles. And I was just hooked. So it was literally, I read that book. I ran, this is the exact trajectory that I went. I ran my first half marathon. It was the Asbury Park half marathon. It was at the beach. So it was basically downhill. Like it was super, super slick, super fast. It was great. Then I said, okay, that wasn't that bad. I signed up for a race that was a 2-day race. So you show up to a 5K course in like the mountains of New Jersey, and you run for 6 hours. You run as far as you can. You could sleep for 3 if you want, but it's just like you run for 6 hours. You cover as much distance as you can on Saturday, and then you come back on Sunday and do that. At this point in time, I was running like 3 days a week on a treadmill at Rutgers at I think I was running 10 miles Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I was like, if I can run 10 miles, I'll just drop the pace a little bit and I can run for 6 hours. What the? Easy. Not easy at all. Very, very difficult, but like finished it. I finished 6 hours one day, was busted, came back and did 6 hours the second day. I was like, whoa. I was like, that's pretty sweet. I think I ended with like 50 miles over the course of 2 days. So from half marathon to 50 miles. I was like, that's pretty cool. And then I found this race called the North Face Endurance Challenge, which was a 50-mile race through Bear Mountain State Park in New York. And I was like, if I can run 10 miles fast, I can run 50 miles slow. What's that? Not at all. Of course, this was in the mountains. There was a bunch of elevation change. Some of the course was so steep and rugged that you're literally on all fours crawling your way out of stuff. Really sick course. But I finished it. Like, it wasn't pretty at all. At this point, I really didn't know how to do ultra, right? So you're supposed to eat, you're supposed to drink fluid, you're supposed to take salt, tabs, sodium, XYZ. I didn't do any of that. I don't recall eating at all during the whole race until we got to the final aid, maybe the second to last or the last aid station, which was mile like 43 or something like that. Mm. And I just ravaged that aid station, right? So the aid station has food, it has drinks, it has XYZ, anything that you could need. And I just went to town on as much food as I could possibly consume. Because I guess my body woke up. I was like, hey, man, you should probably eat some. I finished that race and lost 10 pounds in that 12-hour window. Again, you live and you learn. But finished, right? It took me about 12 hours. And I was like, if I can do 50 miles, I can do 100, obviously. And literally that was, I believe, May of 2019. I had tried 3 times to run 100 miles. So I had signed up for the New Jersey one day. This is San Diego one day that Mr. David Goggins said. I found the equivalent in New Jersey. It was a 1-mile loop that you run around for 24 hours. I was the most confident guy on the planet Earth going into this race. I'm running 100 miles. It's going to be so easy. I just did 50, 100K. I guess it's flat. What does that mean? Not the case at all. It wrecked me. I ran 50 miles straight. I sat down and I went to go get back up, and it was pretty tough. I hobbled around for like 23 miles, and I was like, I'm done. I remember sitting in my chair and asking my dad. So my mom and dad do what's called crewing. They're angels. They come to every single race, and they basically just sit there and wait for me is basically what's going on. They provide food. They provide support, XYZ. I said, hey, Dad, can you wake me up in 3 minutes? I want a 3-minute nap. He said, yeah, man. I woke up 2 hours later. 2 hours later, I woke up. It was early November. It was like 20 degrees. I was out of my mind. I got up and I walked to like the HQ basically, and I was wearing an ankle tag that tracked my lap count. I took it off. I said, can I please stop? Just please. I'm going to go home now. That was fun. Thank you so much. I climbed in my car. My parents cleaned everything up. And I just remember like waking up in bed. And I woke up and I was like, oh, you did so well. Da, 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 da. And I was expecting to be like not able to walk. And I got up and was walking just fine. And I was like, oh. And that for me was the first kick in the shin of like, dude, you totally sold yourself short. Like you can do a half marathon, you can do a 6 hour, you can do a 50 mile. And those were difficult. But when it got really hard, you quit. And I didn't like hearing that. And I kind of just shoved that under the rug for a little bit. And then I finally kind of looked at myself in the mirror. I was like, dude, you totally quit that race. Like, you're fine. Yes, it hurt. It's not easy, XYZ. I could have done some things better. But you quit. Like, just shy of me, like, falling over and not being able to get back up. Maybe that's extreme. But, like, you were still moving. You just chose to quit. So that was end of 2019. And then 2020, I had tried 3 more times, actually. 2 or 3. I forget. The first go around at the NJ one day, I went to 73 miles. The second go around, I just like went outside my house and I was like, hey, Mom, I'm going to go do this thing. Don't mind me. You go on about your day. I'll see you when I see you. And just did like loops around my neighborhood for 80 miles. And I remember being in the middle of the street at mile 80 and I just like talked myself out of it. I was like, dude, like you did better than last time. This is an improvement. Like, hey man, like you deserve, like go take a shower and go to bed. That's exactly what I did. And I woke up and I was like, dude, again. Like when it got really, like, yes, was it an improvement? 100%. But when it got really hard, I quit, which didn't sit well because I'm like, oh, I was like, can I just do this 100-mile thing? And like, why did I even start this? I was like, this is getting a little bit out of hand. So fast forward to, I think the first time you and I kind of met in passing, our buddy Sam put on an event that was a 24-hour race in Tamaquist Park.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
I butchered it last time. Tamaquist Park in Westfield, New Jersey. And I had put in a whole training block. I had done a bunch of training. I said, this is the day. I was like, I'm running 100 miles. No ifs, ands, or buts. I went out and I ran 93. I was really well on pace, and then I just fell off the rails because every race that I'd done consecutively, I had learned something from. So how to eat a little bit better. Maybe change your shoes so your feet don't blow up and hurt so bad. Up until this point, I had never stayed up for 24 hours. So I had never practiced, as silly as it sounds, like sleep deprivation. Like I'm in bed pretty regimentedly at that time. And I remember kind of getting tired and then talking myself, oh, dude, you can walk. You're ahead of pace. I was ahead of schedule. And then next thing you know, I'm like sleepwalking, falling asleep, standing up. And I'm like leaning on trees to try and like rationalize what the heck is going on. And again, just you lose yourself when you take the focus out of the task at hand. So I ended up staying up for 24 hours, but only 93 miles again. And that was a funny one because I had went home and I was like, my parents were like, over the moon, Kieran, this is so much better. You do well. And I was trying to tell myself that. I was like, dude, like this is improving. It was, but like the goal is 100 miles. Like I have not done it, and I could have done it, but you fell off the, like whatever the reason is, like is BS. Like you did not do it. However, I want to try and rationalize it to myself to sleep at night. Bottom line, I didn't run 100 miles, and I was like, oh, and this, I'm like, dude, I'm just not cut out. I'm not gonna. This isn't gonna happen. It's just 3 times. This has consumed my life over the past year. Just not going to happen. And that I didn't buy at all. I said that once. I was like, dude, F off. No way. And then literally Sam's race was on November 9th. I went home probably about 2 weeks later, and I wrote on my whiteboard. I was like, December 5th, 100 miles. That's it. I was like, I was really hoping third time was going to be the charm, and it wasn't. So that kind of threw off my mojo a little bit. Like that would have been cool to say. But fourth time ended up being the charm. Literally, I woke up at 6 a.m. I had like my Camelback, which you can pour water and stuff into, carry some food. I brought my debit card and I just did loops. And I was like, I'm not stopping until this watch says 100.00. It was not pretty. I screwed up a lot of stuff. But to a point that you mentioned earlier, your body can or cannot be prepared. But up until that point, like I had trained my mind pretty well to learn that every time I was unsuccessful in the past, it was because I let my mind get away from me. I let myself talk myself out of it. I let myself say, hey, man, you're doing great, dude. This is so good. You deserve a rest. Just stop. And to this point, Robina, no way. Fuck that, dude. Like, nothing happened. And just like gutted it out. It was ugly as all hell. Took me a little over 30 hours. And literally, I remember I was doing loops of just like random towns. And I remember coming up like back home and it said like 99.9 something. I walked to the top of my block and I walked to the bottom of my block and it went ding to my, like the mile marker, and it said 100. I stopped my watch. I went inside. I think I showered, had a bunch of ice cream and pizza, and then went to sleep.
What else can you do? Wow.
So what other options do you have at that point?
I mean, dude, it's really cool to hear the progression and to know that you made it further each time. And in part, you weren't able to talk yourself into finishing because it almost felt like, well, this is good enough because, I did better than last time. And I guess my question for you not to take this away from the ultra running, but to just make it more applicable for everybody listening, 100 miles is big, right? That's a huge goal. And when you put that on the calendar, you say December 5th, I'm gonna run 100 miles. That's like an FU kind of goal, like at yourself,
Yeah.
right?
That's a good way.
But at the same time, I think one of the hard things for people following through on smaller goals is that it's not that big. And when they don't follow through, it's, they shrug their shoulders. It's not a big deal. Like I didn't make my bed today. I didn't do the laundry. Like I didn't go to the gym, but it's not 100 miles. So it's like, it's not a big deal. Do you have those moments is my question. And if so, do you have that same internal dialogue in those moments when it's, you're in your house by yourself and you should be doing something, but you don't want to, or you're at work and you got to stay 5 extra minutes to clean up, but you really don't feel like it. Do you have that same back and forth?
That's a really good question, man. I absolutely have a back and forth. So like in my world, training, working hard, depending on, let's call it like the segment of my life, like training is an absolute non-negotiable. 100 miles is an absolute non-negotiable. When I do races, when I train, if I have a workout, like that's happening. No ifs, ands, or buts, like figure it out. Cleaning my room? I don't know. It's up to interpretation. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, dude, I should totally clean my room. And the day goes by, I'm like, I was like, what's like, it's definitely different. But to your point, one of the things that I'm trying to get better at is kind of the mantra of how you do, was it one thing is how you do everything?
How you do anything is how you do everything.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm trying to rope that in so that I can be consistent in all areas of my life. And it's funny, man, the internal dialogue, I'll say that, like maybe if I'm doing something at home, like, hey man, how you do anything is how you do everything. But I'm like, dude, I'm cleaning the dishes. Like so there's always like a back and forth. It's a great question. And it's absolutely something I'm looking to get better at.
You know what? I think this is a cool topic because I don't know if there's a right or wrong here. And I used to be super hardcore team. How you do anything is how you do everything. And now I almost wonder myself, does it matter if I do an amazing job cleaning the dishes, or is good enough and some of that extra energy can go towards something else, right? And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but what I will say is I was rereading some notes from a book I read probably 7-8 years ago called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And in the book, he talks about this crime theory from, I believe, New York City and maybe the 1990s. And it was called the broken windows theory. And so the theory is if a city cracks down on small crime, so like broken windows, graffiti, they clean things up, then big crime will also decrease. And the idea is that a broken window serves as a signal to a potential criminal that this community doesn't care about crime, right? They're not going to fix this window. They're not going to stop it from happening. So then someone else breaks a window, and someone else breaks a window. And then all of a sudden, everything's down the drain. And I thought about it in a very different way now versus 7-8 years ago when I first read the book. And I almost thought of it as those decisions we make, right? Will I make my bed or will I clean my room? And you don't do it, right? Maybe that's a broken window. Maybe you could go out of your way to do something nice for somebody and you don't do it. That's a broken window. And slowly but surely, those things almost become part of our internal dialogue, and that all those windows eventually are broken. And does that lead to a bigger problem down the road? I don't know if it's the same. And I'm curious for you, if you feel like other areas of your life improve or detract from ultra running in a way that you've noticed. Like if you have a great day at work, do you also have a great run every single time? Or if you have a really hard conversation with a peer or a client, or sales calls don't go well, do you struggle to get your workout in? Like, how does that work for you?
That's a really good question. I would say that and again, maybe this is going to sound silly considering we're talking about dishes again. Anytime, one of the things that I have found myself doing, I think largely because of ultra running, is looking to seek discomfort in areas of my life that traditionally maybe I didn't care about, right? So maybe it's the dishes, and that's still an example, but we'll stay consistent there. Like, why do I not care about doing the dishes? Why do I not care? Like, my room's a mess. Like, should that bother me? I don't know. But it's one of the things that I'm playing with because it is tricky because, again, how you do anything is how you do everything. And another way I like to put it is if what I just did or didn't do was broadcasted to the world, all of my friends, all of my family, all of the people I look up to, would I want them knowing my room is a damn mess? Would I want them knowing that I just leave dishes everywhere? Like, I don't think so. Right? Because that's not a reflection on how I want to be outward. So it's a good point. I will say, again, something I'm looking to be more consistent with. But to answer your question a little bit more directly, I will say I think I'm fortunate where I look to compartmentalize whatever's going down, right? So maybe I have the worst sales call ever. Like this dude is like cursing me out, which has never happened, by the way. But an extreme scenario, I'm going to close my laptop. Like, it is what it is, man. That happened. That stinks. Maybe reflect on it for a little bit, see what could have gone better. But then I'm going to go work out really hard. Then I'm going to go hang out with my friend. Then I'm going to go do this or that. I really try and not carry one thing over to the other because even in the past for me, man, like when I have done that, I have found myself lying in bed at night, like a little bit stressed. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? And I'm like, dude, something that happened at 8 a.m, I'm still thinking about. And that just throws a wrench in your entire day. And that is much easier said than done to just say, don't give that power. Don't let that bother you, but actively work away from it. Like, hey, this happened. This is what's going down. Here's what I'm going to look to do to fix that today at a later date, what have you. But it is what it is. Now I'm doing this. Now I'm on a podcast with Joe. Before the podcast, I did a workout. Before the workout, I did work. I look to try and segment everything so that they don't overflow.
Absolutely. And I just want to go back to what you said about doing things and thinking about, okay, what if the world saw this? It's a very similar mindset to what I adopted when I finished playing football. And so for anybody who liked that thought process and wants a different way to look at it, when I played football in high school, right, you watch film. And for anybody who hasn't played football, you essentially sit in a room surrounded by your coaches and teammates, and you watch your game, your practice, whatnot, up on the big screen, and all of your mistakes are there for everybody to see. And it's a really humbling experience when you get to see on the big screen yourself walking between plays and not giving your best effort and doing the wrong thing, making mistakes. And you're held accountable for that. And then I played a year in college, and the same thing happens just at a much higher level, right? Every single game, every single practice is on film. And if you're not doing the right thing, if you're not giving your best effort, then you're going to get called for it. And when I stopped playing football, I missed that. And I realized that being on film not only made me a better football player, it made me a better teammate, and it made me a better person. And so I began to live my life as if it was going to be on film for somebody else, just like you said, Kieran. And I am cursed to this day. I walk past a trash can in a bathroom at a grocery store or in the gym, and there's a piece of paper towel on the ground. I'll take 5 steps past it, and then I'll take a big deep breath, and I'll be like, crap, I got to pick that up, don't I? And then I'll pick it up. And like, it's one of those things where if you hardwire that thought process and you really think about it, yeah, we should all be doing just a little bit better to make those tough decisions,
100%. It's so funny you make that analogy too. Literally these past 2 days, I like to take a spin through Westfield when I'm walking around, and there's usually something on the ground, and I will walk past it. I was like, what am I going to do? Leave it here? I was like, I can't do that. Like, go back, like pick up some soggy cardboard box and then just find the nearest garbage can just to toss it out.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%. I'm a pro I'm really proud of this. Actually, if the trash can has a wide enough circumference, I will grab it with both of my feet, like kind of pigeon toe it between my feet, and then jump up if it's like a wet paper towel and throw it with my feet into the trash can. I've gotten pretty good.
Kudos to you, man. I'm not there.
Thank you. Thank you, man. Well, with that conversation behind us, let's move into what I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on, which is just the word endurance. And so you obviously practice endurance in what you do with running. And I'm just going to ask the simple question, what does the word endurance mean to you?
You know, it's funny. And I've had this conversation in my world, right? So ultra running, people who are remotely interested in it usually end up speaking about endurance quite a bit. The first word, for better or for worse, I will do my best to explain, that comes to mind to me, is just guts. Like, who's got guts? And to me, endurance is about who's going to be here when the lights go off and everyone goes home, and then the lights turn on and the sun rises. Like, who is going to be the last man or woman standing in any endeavor, right? So I relate that most directly to ultra running. There's literally races called last man standing. Who's going to be the last person running around this silly loop? But I think that can be translated to anything, right? So if there's one thing that ultra particularly has taught me, it's patience and enduring through tough, difficult, uncomfortable situations. When you are running for 24 hours, it's like you can only listen to music so long. Like, you start to get a headache, and then you realize it's a double whammy because your legs are blown up and now you have a headache, right? So you can only really be stimulated in some capacity for so long. And it's just going to, for me, it comes down to enduring through discomfort, again, uncomfortable, what have you. So enduring to me is just guts. Who's going to be here? Who's got it and who doesn't? And that to me is just so addicting because, again, it is translatable, whether it's in running, whether it's through a sales process, whether it's building a gym, working on other people's timelines. Can you endure working with vendors who are bozos at times? Like, it's so translatable to different areas of life. But to me, guts, who's got it, who doesn't, is the first thing that comes to mind.
Do you think somebody's born with guts and somebody else might not be? Or do you think that's something that anybody can develop?
To the first part of that question, I think absolutely. Like, people are definitely born with guts. They are born leaders. They are born pretty good public speakers. Maybe they're good genetics, XYZ. And then on the flip side, people are not born with any of that. I will say, in my experience, speaking explicitly to Kieran Williams, you can 1000% teach yourself endurance, teach yourself anything for that matter, but we'll try and stay specific on endurance here, because I sometimes joke that, have you told me 3 years ago, like, yo, dude, like, you're going to do like these 100-mile things? And I would have been like, no, I was, you've got me mixed up, man. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I just do this or whatever that was at the time. And I've literally just conditioned myself to go from what was to what is. What is now is waking up at 4:30 to train, doing a bunch of work throughout the day, and then training again at night. And I love it, dude. Every single day I wake up excited. And listen, waking up at 4:30 isn't always like exhilarating, but like once I'm in the gym and once I'm getting after it, like, it is so addicting. So I will say, for anyone that is questioning or saying, that's just not for me, I can't do that, those things like make my skin crawl. Because I'm like, listen, you can. And I have done this in the past too. I used to just think that, like, in any endeavor, whether it be being successful in business, being successful in athletics, like, some people were just born with it. Like, oh, like, lucky for them, like, he owns a company. Oh, dude, like, lucky for him. She's an Olympic, like, clearly she's got something. And the best thing that I ever did, and still do, is read about the backstories of people in these positions, because it makes it really tangible that more often than not, they had a worse card deck than I was dealt. Right? I am very lucky, love my family, they're awesome, XYZ, grew up playing sports, you name it. A lot of folks did not have that privilege, right? So once I read that, I was like, dude, you're just making excuses. Like, I was like, oh, that stings, but it's true. And then once I realized that other people were able to go from nothing to the pinnacle of their sport, of their profession, of their life, of their what have you. It made it tangible for me. So I was like, whoa, like reading David Goggins' book, for example, he went from like crazy overweight to bodybuilder, Navy SEAL to 100-mile man. And I read that and I was like, well, I have no excuse to not do what I want to do. So you can absolutely do it. It takes a lot of hard work, which is tough. But in my opinion and in my experience, whatever it is your endeavor is, you can do it. And with that, like the way I frame it a lot as well is like, what else is there? Like, it's so easy. It is very easy. Maybe that's why a lot of folks do it. To say, oh, it's not for me. Like, I just do this. I want to do that. I would love to do that, but I'm going to go do this. That's very easy because you don't have to work too hard. To me, even if it's intangible, sounds impossible, running 100 miles, doing crazy stuff, I'm like, dude, at least give it a go. Like, you don't know until you try. Like, I love one of my, some of the more entertaining conversations I have with people. They'll just be like, yo, man, like, how's running going? Like, what was the last race? Like, oh, I did X, Y, Z. Like, oh, dude, I could never. And I'm like, oh, man, like, have you tried? And again, like, you don't have to just start running 100 milers, but like, have you tried? Like, oh no, I'm just, I'm like, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Just try.
I think there's a big difference between willing and able. And I think it's dangerous when people confuse the two. Because I would argue that anybody who's able-bodied enough to do any physical task, and we can extrapolate that to any task in the world, you're able, right? Like, it might be an extreme scenario where you would have to dedicate all of your time, all of your money, find help, etc. But you could be able. But are you willing to make the sacrifices to get there? Sacrifices of your time, your relationships, your resources, your comfort. I think that's a big one, right? Are you willing to sacrifice comfort? And I would even argue that comfort, or having comfort, actually is probably the sacrifice. If you're avoiding discomfort, I think that's the wrong move. That's my opinion. You're obviously nodding your head over there. And have you ever heard the phrase "comfort is a slow death"?
Absolutely. Love that.
Yeah. So episode 4 of this podcast, Tony Reyes introduced me to that. And just, it couldn't be more true. Comfort is a slow death. Now, go ahead, Kieran.
I was going to say, like, in line with that, one of the exercises that I like to do is shoot myself out to 90 years old. And now listen, without diving into the rabbit hole of like, I think Musk is up to some stuff and we're easily to 300. So by 90, I will still be running 100 miles. But traditionally, it's probably not the case. So we'll stick with 90. Would I regret not doing what I'm avoiding right now? Like, everyone, myself included, always likes, oh, dude, I got time for that. Or maybe I do or I don't. Like, I'll do it later. And whatever your endeavor is that you're shirking off or just not doing, are you okay? And I think Spencer's sounding morbid. Like, are you okay with dying, not having done doing this, right? Comfort is a slow death, because when you realize that it's too late to do everything that you wanted to do, or maybe had a little fire to do, but just shirked off, that sucks. Like, that doesn't even do it justice, but like, that sucks because now you can't, right? So back to just like, give it a go. Like, what is the absolute worst thing that's going to happen? And again, whatever it is, not running 100 miles, starting a business, you name it, but just take a step in that direction and see where you land and just go from there.
Beautiful. Now, so this last question, right? I want to ask it with a very specific direction, because I think what you just spoke to is the perfect guidance and advice for somebody who maybe wants to do something hard under their own volition, but just hasn't pulled the trigger for whatever reason. So with this next question, the final question, I want to ask it to you and frame it as though the person listening to your answer is handling something in life that they didn't ask for. They were just handed a diagnosis. They just lost a loved one. They just lost a job, going through something challenging that they didn't ask for. And so my question to you is, what advice or guidance would you have for that person on the other end of the podcast?
Absolutely, man. I think how I try to rationalize things is that the only way is forward. And it sounds cliche. I think it's actually Under Armour's like tagline. The only way is forward, because again, shoot yourself out to 90 years old. Whatever it is super, super, super difficult. No doubt about it. I'm sorry to hear. But we can either live the rest of our days harping on this, not making any forward progression, just stagnating, or we say, hey man, this is what it is. This sucks. This is so hard. XYZ. How do we go forward? And then figure that part out. Because to me, there's absolutely time for reflection. There's absolutely time to reconsider XYZ. But there has to be a point, in my opinion, that you just have to say, okay, this happened. Whether it's tearing an ACL, which again is minor, losing a loved one, your business goes bankrupt, fill in the blank. The only way is forward, because if you just sit there and harp on it, nothing's going to happen. And listen, if you're okay with that, which I don't think is the case, okay, but the only way is forward, and you have to take that first step. The not to beat the 100-mile dead horse here, but the coolest thing that ultra has taught me is that literally no matter how slow I will go, or I am going, if you just keep moving forward, you will get there, right? So I did a race New Year's Eve to New Year's Day. It was a 24-hour run. I was trying to run 100 miles. The first 75 miles was great. I was on top of the world, killing it. 75 to 100 was crash and burn, screwed a bunch of stuff up, was literally thinking to myself, this is the longest day ever. It sucks. This sucks so bad. No matter how slow I went, you will finish. So if there's anything I could relay, is just, as painful as it is, as tough as it is, as difficult it is in the moment, I think I can promise that you will be better off for taking a step forward. And B, more often than not, I genuinely feel you will get there by just moving. It's slow, but you'll get there.
Oh man, that was just perfect. And it really, I was happy you went in that direction, because I had a quote that I wanted to share, and I think it goes hand in hand. Now, I am going to butcher this person's name, but this quote is by Haruki Murakami. Actually, I might have done okay there. And he once said, "And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about." And I just appreciate you, Kieran, because it's very apparent that you are willingly stepping into these storms over and over and over again, and coming out the other side as a different person. And I'm just grateful that you're willing to share those stories and share your insights here on the podcast. And so should people want to follow along with your journey, find out more about you, or even maybe come grab a workout if they're in the Westfield, New Jersey area, where should they go to connect with you?
Seriously, man. Well, before that, I can't thank you enough for having me on, man. When you reached out, I was humbled and couldn't thank you enough, man. It is so awesome to do this podcast, and for me to be a part of it is an absolute privilege. So I thank you. Reaching out, it's probably not wise, right, to give my cell phone number.
You could. Hey, I wouldn't advise it. I put mine out on the internet, and it's been good and bad. So yeah, maybe just like an Instagram or something.
Instagram handle is Kieran W1231. Maybe my email's better. ktwilliams9@gmail.com. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, I would love to hang out and chat, whether it be endurance or unrelated to endurance at all. Happy to help.
That's perfect, Kieran. And last question for you. What's next?
The big one so far for this year, in May, I will be in Vermont running a 200-mile race, which is fun. I'm very excited for that one. That's probably the highlight as far as difficulty goes, and then we'll go from there.
Well, you know what? We'll have to have you back on after the 200 miles. How about that?
Dope, man.
All right, that sounds good.
Just come to the race and like live stream for like 4 days.
That sounds good. We'll see you there. All right. With that being said, we will talk to you guys next time. Kieran, thank you again, man.
Thank you, Joe.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. Oh, and one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.